This week's teaching will come out of Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. This is a story about Jesus calming a storm. This story happens early in Jesus' ministry, and this is the first miracle that he performs over nature with his disciples. A very short text, but I want to read this and then go through this with you. Let's begin in Mark 4:35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the winds and the waves obey him." What we're going to do with this text today is we're going to talk about the storms of life and how Jesus is there for us in the storms of life. But I just want to give you a few textual issues here that we need to talk about. First of all, as I said, it was early in Jesus' ministry, but he is already very popular. He has big crowds following him all the time. And so one of the ways Jesus escaped from the crowds is he would get the disciples to take him out on the boat into the middle of the lake, where the crowds couldn't get to him. In fact, if you'll notice here in verse 36, 37, they left the crowds behind. That was the purpose of getting in the boat many times for Jesus. That's where he would sleep, he would get rest, so he could be re-energized for his mission and his ministry. So this is not an unusual occurrence. They go out into the middle of the lake where he can get some sleep. It's not unusual for him to fall asleep. But what is unusual is the ferocity of this storm. The storm comes up, and you have to remember, of the 12 disciples, 4 of them are professional fishermen, which means by definition they're professional boatsmen. So they know what they do, how to operate a boat on a lake. They know what they're doing. But this storm comes up, and it's so fierce that water begins to fill the boat, and they realize we're going to drown. And so they wake Jesus up, and they're terrified, and they say, "Do you not care if we're going to drown?" They blame him and say, "What's up? We're about to drown here, and you're back here sleeping. You need to be up here doing something." And so, of course, Jesus comes, and he has authority over the storm. He calms the waves and wind. He speaks to them, and they obey his voice. And then he turns to them and says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And of course, there's this famous line here where fear and faith are intermingled here in this comment, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But he is astonished at their lack of faith. He is sad that they have fear in the midst of the storm. And then, of course, they're even more terrified because they say, "Who is this? Even the winds and the wave will obey him." In other words, this really is the Son of God. He has authority over the winds and the waves, and he speaks and they obey. So, wow, he is the coming Messiah. And so that's the story in a nutshell. But what I want to talk about is I want to take more or less a metaphorical view of this and talk about the storms in our lives, because I think we have storms. I'm specifically going to talk about men today, although it will certainly apply to women as well. But I think there are 3 sources of storms in our lives that we have to deal with. Source number 1 is ourselves. We are the cause of many of the storms in our lives. When I have an action, when I do something, what I do is not in a vacuum. It affects everyone around me. And so when I make bad decisions, when I sin, when I do things I should not be doing, when I am making decisions, it affects everyone around me. And there's ripples that go out from that decision that affect the people that are closest in relationship to me. And many times the storms in my life are because I've made a bad decision, or I have sinned. Something has gone on in my life that put me in a position to where I am causing my own storm. And so I am the source of most of the storms in my life. And it's most of the time, it's consequences of my sin or consequences of bad, poor, awful decisions that I've made. I'm sure you understand that and relate exactly to what I'm talking about there. So that's number one, is ourselves. We put ourselves in the storms. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we're put in storms because of the decisions of other people. Other people will come and make bad decisions. They will sin. They will really, really mess up. And then if we're in a relationship with them, what does it do? It puts us in those storms as well. And so those decisions sometimes that other people make, they ripple to us, and that ripple to us puts us in a place where a storm arises in our lives. And then third, sometimes there's just what we call acts of God. There's things beyond our control that happen. And this storm in Mark chapter 4 is one of those examples. A storm comes up on a lake and they're in trouble and they're going to die if Jesus doesn't intervene. That wasn't due to a decision anyone made. It's just an act of God. You see floods and earthquakes and storms come up and tornadoes. All of those kinds of things can happen. They're not random acts, but they're acts of God, and that can put us into the storm as well. And so all of us, as we live through life, understand that we're going to have storms. Storms are tough times in life. They are times of adversity. They are times when it's really, really, really hard, and the only thing we have is to hold on to our faith. And those times come, and they come randomly, and they come because other people make decisions. Primarily, they come because we make decisions that put us into the middle of the storm. So we're just making the assumption here. We're all make decisions. Some of them are bad. We all hang out with other sinners, and sometimes they make bad decisions. We're going to end up in storms. We're going to end up in times of adversity. We're going to end up in circumstances that are adverse. So now, how do we deal with it? And what I want to do is I want to talk to you about how most people deal with it, how many men deal with it. And I'm going to talk to you also about a healthy way to deal with the storms coming out of this text. Okay, so number one, how do we deal with storms? And this applies to men and women all together, although I'm going to make most of my application to men here. Number one is they deny. They deny. Both men and women, when we get into the middle of the storm, the first thing we'll do is we'll deny. And I've just got to say, for whatever reason, men are worse at this than women are. Okay, we deny and deny and deny and deny till we cannot deny the fact there is a storm anymore. And let me tell you what I have seen happen numerous times. I'm talking 40, 50, 60, 70 times in my ministry career, and it breaks my heart every time. But this is how it happens. There's a marriage, and the woman comes to the man, to the wife, to the husband, and she says, "We have a problem." And he says, "No, we don't have a problem." And she says, "Yes, we have a problem." He says, "No, we don't have a problem." And she says, "Yes, we have a problem." He says, "No, we don't have a problem." And she says, "We have a problem." He says, "No, you have a problem. I don't have a problem." And she says, No, we have a problem." He says, "No, it's your time of the month. That's your problem." And she says, "We need to go to counseling." And he says, "No, you need to go to counseling." And this goes on for years. It will go on for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, where she's saying, "We have a problem in our relationship. We need healing. We need to go get some help. We need some counseling. We need to talk." And he's saying, "No, no, no, no. Denial, denial, denial. Everything's fine. I come home from work. I turn on the Sports Center, and everything is blissful. We do not have a problem in our relationship." And then one day, the papers show up, and she's ready to leave. And she's been fighting him for 10 years, and for 10 years he wouldn't come out of denial, and so she's done. And let me tell you, most of the time when a woman is done, she is done. Not always, but most of the time, without an incredible move of the Holy Spirit, she's done. And she's walking away, and that's about the time the man comes out of denial and says, "You know what? I think we have a problem. I think there's a problem here." Well, she's already emotionally disengaged and moving on with her life, and now he's ready to go to counseling, and he's ready to talk, and it's over for her. And he loses his family because of one reason: he's in denial. And so if there's any one thing I could encourage you to do through this video today, is I would encourage you to do this. You need to come out of denial sooner. You need to learn how. You need to put up your antennas for the emotions that are going on around you with relationships. You need to put on your antennas to problems going on at work. And you need to come out of denial and deal with problems quicker. Because reality is, the sooner we deal with problems, one, the easier it is to deal with them. Two, the storm's not quite so big, so the consequences aren't so big. It's just the earlier in that storm you get, and you come out of denial and deal with a storm, the easier it is and the better it is and the less the consequences for that storm. So one of the takeaways from this is just come out of denial quicker. Okay, just come out of denial quicker. I wonder if the disciples were on that boat and they were in denial for a while, and this storm comes up and they're going, you know what, we can handle this, we can handle this, we can handle this, and it isn't until they're about to drown that they call out to Jesus and they want some help. Maybe they needed to come out of denial a little bit sooner. I think it's a pretty typical male response. Number two is they self-medicate. They self-medicate. How many times have you seen men and women, and how do they deal with the problems of life? How do they deal with adversity? They self-medicate. And of course, there's a lot of sinful ways that we self-medicate that we talk about a lot, and you hear from the pulpits at churches, and this applies to both men and women. But they'll self-medicate through sex, men especially through pornography, through drinking, through drug abuse, through an affair, through going out and picking up men or women at the bar. All of those kind of things. You hear about those all the time that have to do with drinking, drugs, and sex. But I'm telling you, there's some other ways we self-medicate that are just as destructive, because what we're doing is we're staying in denial. Self-medication is just a way of dealing with denial. It's just a way that we deal with it. So it is self-medication is just our way of keeping us in denial. Let me give you some examples. Men may go to sports bars and they may escape into television or into sports. I see men do that all the time. Why are they watching TV all the time? They don't want to deal with life. Why are they watching sports all the time? They don't want to deal with life. Why are they going to the sports bar? Because they don't want to deal with what's going on at home. They may immerse themselves into a sport like basketball or running or weightlifting or golf. And all of those are fine activities. There's nothing wrong with doing any of those unless you're trying to escape, right? Another place men really escape is into work. They become workaholics. Why? Because they don't want to go home and deal with life. And so they escape into their work, and that becomes a way of denying the storm in their lives. Women have a tendency, and I don't, I'm not saying men can't do this and women can't do the others, but women have a tendency to do it one of two ways, either shopping or eating. Women have a tendency to say, you know what, I don't want to deal with life, so what am I going to do? I'm going to eat and I'm going to shop. And so that has a tendency to be the way that women self-medicate. But self-medicating is kind of that second stage. I'm in denial, and now the pressure's getting turned up on the storm, and what am I going to do? I'm either going to come out of denial and deal with it. I don't want to do that yet, so what am I going to do? I'm going to self-medicate. That's kind of a natural thing that we do in the flesh. Number three, they blame. They blame. If you go back to the garden and Adam and Eve, what did? They hid, and then when they couldn't hide anymore, they blamed. Adam said Eve did it, and Eve said Satan did it. Well, it's the same way with us. We come out of denial, and the storm is now big around us, and we can't deny anymore, and now it's huge, and we're overwhelmed, so what do? We begin to blame. It's my wife's fault. It's my kid's fault. It's the economy's fault. It's my boss's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's my friend's fault. It's anyone's fault but me. I don't want to have to take personal responsibility, so I'm going to blame someone else. What did the disciples do in the boat when it really got tough? And they waited and they waited and they waited, and then they come out of denial, and the reality is they're going to die. And then what do? They blame Jesus. Do you not care if we drown? Like it's Jesus' fault that they're about to drown in a boat. Jesus is back there asleep. Jesus had nothing to do with it. And yet they're blaming Jesus. How many times have we gone into the storm and not only blame everyone around us, but we blame God? Have you ever been in an adverse situation and you say, God, where are you? God, why don't you love me? God, why won't you rescue me? God, why won't you do this? What are we doing? We're blaming God. Why are we blaming God? Because we don't want to blame ourselves. We don't want to take personal responsibility. So part of what you have to understand in the flesh is that you have this cycle that goes on in you to where you hide. You deny, you self-medicate, and then when you can't handle it anymore and it's just in your face and you can't deny anymore, then you blame other people. And then finally, they worry. Worry. Once you come out of denial and you can't, and you try to blame, but there's nowhere to go but back to you, then what do you begin to do? You begin to worry about what's going to happen. What's going to happen in the future? What are the 8 worst things that could happen? And we play out those scenarios. And we don't get any sleep, and we get an ulcer. Why? Because we're worried about something we can't control in the midst of the storm. And so that's a pretty typical cycle of the flesh. Without the Holy Spirit of God to come in and intervene, that's a pretty typical cycle of the flesh and how we deal with storms. We deny, we self-medicate, we blame, and then we worry. And sometimes we worry and then we go back into denial, and we'll go through that cycle over and over again, right? So that's a really dysfunctional, but kind of the fleshly way that we deal with storms. You see some of that in the disciples when they're blaming Jesus. You see that. You certainly know that they're worried. In fact, Jesus calls it fear. Fear and worry are cousins there. He says, why are you so afraid? See, what are they doing? They're worrying. What else are they doing? They're blaming. So they're caught in that fleshly cycle as well. But Jesus comes in and says, there's a different way to handle the storm. And the way you can handle the storm is through your faith. And so let me just give you 4 tips on how to handle the storm God's way when you get yourself into the middle of a storm. Okay? Number 1, acknowledge the problem. Acknowledge the problem. This is so crucial. Remember I told you earlier that the earlier we come out of denial and acknowledge the problem, the smaller the storm is, and the easier it is to come through that storm and get to the other side. And so that's what we're talking about is we want to learn how to acknowledge the storm earlier in that process. We want to be able to acknowledge those storms so that we can deal with those storms and get to the other side of those storms. I want you to think about this word picture that Bill Hybels gave many years ago. He called it the tunnel of chaos. And I want you to imagine a long tunnel, and in the middle of the tunnel is the pain that you're going to have to go through if you walk through the middle of a storm. But on the other side of that tunnel is what you really want in life. It's peace and contentment and joy. But you know that to get to peace and contentment and joy, you're going to have to walk through the tunnel of chaos and get through the storm. And what Bill Hybels talked about is most people will spend their life at the entrance to the tunnel refusing to go in, blaming other people and denying that it exists and self-medicating and worrying. They're in the middle of that flesh cycle, but they won't go through the storm because they don't want to go through the pain. And in the middle of a culture that is a pain-averse culture where somehow we have said the only thing bad in our culture is pain, I see people all the time just living in denial and running from the pain. And that's what happens is we either run away from it. Literally, we move to another town, we get a divorce and get a new spouse, we'll quit our job, we'll just run from the situation. Or we'll sit at the tunnel of chaos and play the victim and not take personal responsibility and blame other people and live in denial and self-medicate because we don't want to walk through the pain. But let me tell you the godly way to handle a storm is you come out of denial early, you acknowledge the problem, you take personal responsibility, and you say, you know what, I know this is going to be painful, but the longer I wait, the bigger the storm. The longer I wait, the more painful it's going to be. The longer I wait, the more people I'm going to hurt. So what am I going to do? It doesn't matter what the cause of the storm is. It doesn't matter if it's me or someone else. That doesn't matter. What matters is I'm going to take personal responsibility for the storm, and I'm going to walk through the pain of dealing with the storm up front and honestly until I get to the other side, knowing that on the other side is what? Peace and joy and tranquility and contentment and all of those things. And so I want you to be honest about your life, and I want you to examine your life as you listen to this today. And I want you to ask yourself, am I a runner or do I play the victim and just stay right there at the entrance and stay in this cycle of deny, self-medicate, blame, and worry? Or am I ready to acknowledge the problem and just walk through the pain of getting through the storm so it doesn't get bigger and the consequences don't get bigger and more people don't get hurt? And so number 1 would be acknowledge the problem. Number 2 would be stay in the moment. Number 2 is stay in the moment. Here's the thing. If I'm in the middle of a storm and I'm looking backwards, the only thing in the past is regret. And the only thing in the future is worry. Right? I can't control the future. I can't control the past. I can't change the past. I can't control the future. When I look at the past, there's just regret, which just paralyzes me. And in the future is worry and fear, which paralyzes me. And of course, that's what Jesus is upset about the disciples about here is they're fearful. But here, what's the one thing I can do in the middle of the storm? I can stay in the moment and do what I need to do today to get through the storm. right? Here's what happens in my life. I have a tendency, I think people have a tendency to be one of two. They either live in the past or live in the future. Worriers live in the future. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? I'm not a worrier. You know what I am? I'm a regret guy. I live my life in the past. Oh, if I'd have only made this decision. Oh, if I only hadn't have done this. Oh, if I only hadn't. And I will get so full of shame and regret that I will literally paralyze myself to where I can't move forward in the storm and I get stuck. I'm stuck at the entrance to that cave because I'm so full of shame and regret. What good does that do me? What good does that do my wife and my kids and my coworkers? What good does that do anybody? Nothing. But that's Satan's playground. Satan says, okay, I want to get you stuck in the past with regret, or I want to get you stuck in the future with worry, because he knows either way he can paralyze us so we don't move forward in the storm, and he can wreak more havoc in our lives. So what God is asking me to do is, how about you just trust me and stay in the moment? Instead of being filled with fear, why don't you be filled with faith? Why don't you just trust me and stay in the moment? And here's the one thing you have is today. And today you can make good decisions. You can make good decisions and faith decisions that are going to lead you one step at a time out of the storm. And if you make good decisions one day at a time, where are you going to be in 6 months? You're going to be out of that storm. You're going to be through that storm. How do you get through the storm? You don't focus on the past. You don't focus on the future. You stay in today. You make good decisions today. And good decisions today move me one step closer to getting through the tunnel. And it may not make a difference today or tomorrow or next week. But day after day and week after week and month after month, and suddenly we get to the other side and the storm is over. And we have that peace and that joy and that contentment and that tranquility. And so I want you to not only acknowledge the problem, I want you to stay in the moment and could you just make a good decision today that helps get you through the storm? Just a good decision today that's going to inch you forward, and before you know it, you will be out of the storm. Number 3, I want you to utilize your faith. I want you to utilize your faith. What do I mean by utilizing your faith? Look at the story and look at Jesus. Jesus has authority over the storm. That's who he is. He is the Son of God. He is the creator and the sustainer of the universe. And he can solve and calm storms. He can make storms go away. Most of the time, to be honest with you, he doesn't do that. But you know what he does say? He says, I will come. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So what I'll do is I'll make sure the storm doesn't sink your boat. And so I need to utilize my faith. Who is Jesus Christ in my life? He's working everything for his glory. He's working everything for my good. He's not ever going to leave me in adversity. He's never going to leave me in the storm. And so what do I need to do? In the middle of the storm, I stay in the moment. I don't look in the past or look in the future. I utilize my faith and say, what do I know about the nature of God? I know he loves me. I know he has my best interest at heart. I know he's going to work for his glory in this. I know he's not going to let the storm overtake me. He's promised me he's never going to put anything in my path that I can't walk through to the other side. So is this too big for me? No. Can I make it through it? Yes. How? Lean on what I know. And what I know is God is in the middle of it for his glory and my good, and he's going to work on my best interest in the middle of all this. So I can hold on to that. One of the questions I think Jesus is asking in this story is, am I enough? Am I enough? Are you going to have a faith to believe that I can take away the storm if I want to? Do you have the faith to believe that I can walk you through the storm? Do you have faith to believe that I'll never leave you or forsake you and you're going to get through this storm to the other side? Do you have faith to believe that today I have enough grace for you to get through today and you don't have to worry about tomorrow? Matthew 6:33, Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Why? Because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. You don't have to worry about tomorrow. Just stay focused on today. And that's what gets us through the storm. Not tomorrow. God's in control of tomorrow. Just today. God, just give me the grace to get through the day. Give me the manna for today. Give me the faith for today. Give me the sustenance for today. Just help me make it through the day. And does God do that? Every day. And as I make good decisions, he sees me through the storm to the other side. Is his presence enough? Is his presence enough? Let me tell you why I bring that up. Because here's what I hear from people sometimes. Yes, his presence is enough, but he needs to. But he needs to. God, are you going to remove the storm? God usually doesn't remove the storm. He usually changes you in the middle of the storm. What if the storm is designed to change you to be a better man or a better woman for God? But we come and what do we want to do? God, I trust you, now remove the storm. And then when the storm is still there the next morning, well, why did you do that, God? We go back into our blame cycle, don't we? God says, how about me just being enough? Without having to remove the storm, without doing anything, is my presence enough for you? Is my grace enough for you? Am I enough for you today just to be there with it? That's the question that you have to ask when you're walking through the storm. And finally, number 4 is look to your leader. Look to your leader. Because reality is, in the middle of a storm, your leader, Jesus Christ, usually has some sort of benefit for you in the midst of the storm. I believe that storms don't happen by accident. I believe God's in the middle of storms. I believe not necessarily God causes the storms, but he allows them to happen because what's he trying to do? He's trying to do something with you in the middle of the storm. He's trying to build your character. He's trying to forge you into the man or woman of God that he's called you to be. Where do we learn our biggest lessons? Where do we grow our faith in life? Where do we build our character and our strength? It is always through adversity. We don't build our character and strength in good times most of the time. Most of the time, our character is built, who we are, what we are about, what we believe, what we hold on to. The best things about us in our hearts and in our lives are usually found in the midst of the storms. And so instead of running from them and denying them and blaming God for them, what if we could change our perspective and we could see the storms from God's perspective? And we could say, you know what, this storm is put here because God's trying to teach me something. Maybe he's trying to teach me patience. Maybe he's trying to teach me trust. Maybe he's trying to teach me compassion. There's something in this storm God's wanting me to learn so I can be more of the man or woman of God God wants me to be. So what's he doing? So no longer am I going to run from the storm. I'm going to embrace the storm. I'm going to walk through the storm one day at a time, one step at a time. I'm going to stay out of denial. I'm not going to blame others. I'm going to take personal responsibility. I'm going to stay in the moment and do the right thing today because what do I believe? I believe in the big picture that God has a purpose in the storm and that I'm going to see the storm from God's perspective and not mine, and I'm not going to play the victim, and I'm going to use the storm as an opportunity to become everything God wants me to be. And when I walk into the storm with that perspective, you know what usually happens in the storm? I get through it quicker. I learn lessons that are invaluable for me for later on. And usually the consequences, the ripple effect on the people I love around me are not near as great as when I am whining and blaming and refusing to walk into the tunnel of chaos and running. And so you have 2 choices in your life. You can stay in this cycle of deny and self-medicate and blame and worry, a fleshly cycle that is so destructive and destroys relationships. It destroys marriages. It destroys friendships. It destroys businesses. It destroys faith. Or am I going to stand in the midst of the storm and I'm going to say, God, you have a purpose in this for me to grow me up into who you want me to be. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to acknowledge the problem. I'm coming out of denial. I'm going to take personal responsibility. I'm going to stay in the moment. I'm not going to be paralyzed by the future or by the past. I'm not going to let Satan do that to me. And I'm going to look to you, and I'm going to remember who you are, and your presence is going to see me through, and I'm going to learn what I need to learn in the storm to become exactly what you need and you want me to be. That's your 2 choices with the storms. I hope, I pray that you choose the second, because in the second, what you will find is that you will grow up into being everything God has designed you to be in this life.